usually, when we talk about being the victim of psychological manipulation, we kind of crave this incredibly clean story.
Right. Yeah. Like a movie.
Exactly. We want really clear boundaries. There is a bad person who does a bad thing and like an innocent person who suffers.
It's a comforting way to look at it for sure.
It totally is. But welcome to today's deep dive, where we are dismantling that clean narrative. We're going to look at the mechanics of how everyday repressed emotions...
Just the totally mundane stuff.
Yeah, the mundane frustrations you might feel after, like, a bad day at work or a fight with a relative. We're looking at how those can actually be twisted to turn an innocent victim into a devastating perpetrator of revenge.
It is a profoundly dark trap, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding it requires us to completely rethink, how we view vulnerability.
Right.
Because in this scenario, the lines between victim and villain really blur. We see how a person's own unprocessed pain is essentially, well, it's harvested and weaponized by someone else.
It's wild. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull apart the source material and really understand the hidden mechanics of that emotional distortion.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at the subtle nature of brainwashing and trace the very specific psychological routes that cause vengeance to so often strike the entirely wrong target.
Which happens way more than you think.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how someone can be manipulated into seeking revenge on behalf of, like, a third party, we first have to examine the breeding ground for this vulnerability.
Right.
And I think the most unsettling part of the sources is that this breeding ground isn't some exotic cult or a hostage situation. It is just our normal daily lives.
Yeah, I mean, we've been conditioned to associate manipulation with these really dramatic cinematic scenarios.
Like extreme isolation or sleep deprivation.
Exactly. Physical trauma, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the sources highlight that the deepest vulnerabilities actually begin in the most ordinary environments imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
The home, the office.
Right, just everyday spaces.
Yeah, like a neighborhood association even. These are everyday human ecosystems where people are frequently forced to suppress their anger and sadness just to survive the day.
Which is, I mean, that's the reality for almost everyone at some point, right?
Totally.
Like you have a manager who constantly belittles your ideas in meetings, but, you're barely making rent, so you just smile and bite your tongue.
You have to.
Or you're trapped in a family dynamic where simply asserting your own needs triggers this massive days-long guilt trip. So you just learn to swallow your feelings to keep the peace at dinner. You just push it all down.
You push it down and you tell yourself, oh, I'm just being the bigger person, or, I'm just being practical.
Right.
But the critical psychological insight the source is present here is that these suppressed emotions, they don't simply evaporate.
They don't just disappear.
No, not at all. The conscious mind might say, like, the moment passed, I am over it. But the subconscious is keeping a meticulous ledger. And the source material actually uses a very specific mechanism to describe this. They say these unprocessed emotions sink.
They sink, yeah.
They settle at the very bottom of the mind, forming this thick layer of emotional sediment.
And sediment is honestly the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
Because it implies something that just sits there, slowly building mass. It's like pouring murky water into a glass.
Oh, that's a good way to picture it.
Right, the dirt doesn't leave the glass. It just gathers at the bottom, just waiting for the slightest disturbance to muddy the water all over again.
Exactly. And as the suppression shifts from just being an occasional necessity to a habitual daily coping strategy, that sediment quietly begins to distort the individual's entire cognitive framework.
Wow.
It actually warps their values and alters their perception of reality. And the really insidious part is the total lack of awareness.
Because they're just used to it.
Right, the person doesn't feel themselves changing. But the immense weight of all that unprocessed anger and sadness is constantly scanning the perimeter for an exit.
So it's not just a matter of emotions eventually boiling over. It makes me think of like microfractures in a load-bearing wall.
Okay, yeah.
Like if you keep applying invisible stress to a structure, swallowing your pride, hiding your grief, whatever, the wall doesn't necessarily collapse right away.
Right, it holds up for a while.
Yeah, it just develops these tiny microscopic cracks completely invisible to the naked eye, but they are structurally compromising the whole building over time.
That's spot on.
Which kind of leads me to deduce that this gradual daily suppression It's a psychological pressure cooker. And it's actually vastly more dangerous than one singular massive traumatic event, simply because it goes entirely undetected.
The source material strongly supports that deduction.
Hmm.
I mean, think about it. A singular trauma is a visible wound. If a wall gets hit by a wrecking ball, you know you have to rebuild it. You can see the hole. But daily suppression is this unseen, gradual erosion. Because the person doesn't realize their emotional boundaries are completely wearing away, their psychological immune system is basically systematically compromised.
Man, that's scary.
They are walking around desperately seeking structural support without even knowing they're fragile.
So the wall is compromised, and it desperately needs a support beam. That creates the absolute perfect opening for a manipulator to step right in, doesn't it?
It really does. And this brings us to the trap of being understood.
Being understood.
Yeah. The sources point out that when a deeply repressed person encounters someone who seems to truly intimately see them, it transcends a normal social connection.
It's deeper than just making a friend.
Much deeper. It feels like absolute salvation. A person carrying years of hidden emotional sediment feels this profound sense of physical and mental relief when someone finally validates their unexpressed pain.
Because they've been straining to hold up this fractured wall by themselves for years.
Exactly.
Suddenly, someone walks up, puts a hand on the wall, and says, I know how heavy this is. I've got you.
Yes. And if this new person, the manipulator in this case, projects authority and speaks with, like, unwavering, confident language,
Yeah.
the victim's reaction is basically inevitable.
They just fall right into it.
They do. They are deeply exhausted by the sheer effort of suppressing their own emotions. So they instinctively lean all their weight onto this new person's strength. They borrow the manipulator's confidence to replace their own eroded boundaries.
And this is where the dynamic turns incredibly dark, right? Because the manipulator doesn't just stop at, I understand your pain.
No.
They start shaping it. They start suggesting, you were deeply wronged. You shouldn't have to tolerate this. You should take action and get revenge.
Right.
And that suggestion is the spark that finally ignites years of dormant sediment-level anger.
That is the precise sequence of the trap, exactly. But what makes this mechanism so incredibly successful for the manipulator is the victim's internal experience of the event.
What do you mean?
Well, at no point does the victim feel like they're being controlled or coerced. They feel protected, perhaps for the very first time in their lives.
Wow.
They mistake the manipulator's external commands for their own newly awakened internal willpower.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Sure.
It's just difficult to accept that an adult wouldn't notice they are being actively programmed. Like, wouldn't massive, blaring red flags go off the moment someone you just met starts encouraging you to seek vengeance?
You would think so.
Right. Wouldn't your brain just scream, danger, this person is trying to use me?
What's fascinating here is that we have to evaluate the victim's mind based on its current, compromised state, not on the standard of a healthy, well-defended psyche.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
This isn't a sudden, hostile takeover of a secure system. It is a slow, warm, and highly comforting filling of a desperate void.
It feels good to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The brainwashing succeeds precisely because it validates the victim's secret, closely guarded pain.
So validation essentially bypasses all the security cameras.
It shuts the security cameras off entirely. Think about it. If you have spent decades telling yourself, my anger makes me a bad person, I must hide it to survive, and someone finally looks you in the eye and says, your anger is beautiful, it is completely justified, and you must let it out, you do not perceive them as a threat.
You perceive them as a liberator.
Yes, a liberator. Once that long dormant anger is validated and finally given oxygen, the resulting fire is nearly impossible to extinguish. For the first time in their life, the victim feels powerful.
But it's not their power.
Exactly. They are entirely blind to the fact that the power isn't theirs. They are simply enacting the manipulator's hidden agenda.
That dramatically shifts our understanding of compliance. They aren't begrudgingly following a dictator's orders. They are experiencing what they believe is a personal awakening.
Yes.
They think they are finally standing up for themselves.
The illusion of agency is the very glue that holds the brainwashing together. Without it, the manipulation would immediately collapse.
Okay, so the victim is empowered, the fire is burning, and they are finally ready to execute this revenge.
The trap is sprung.
Right. And logically, you would expect them to take all this newly validated energy and march straight back to the terrible manager or the toxic family member and attack the original source of their trauma.
It makes complete logical sense to confront the original abuser. But human psychology, particularly when shaped by trauma, operates on survival mechanisms, not logic.
Okay, how so?
Facing the original source of their pain requires a level of emotional fortitude that the victim simply does not possess, regardless of how much borrowed confidence they have.
Wait, really? Even
Okay.
with the manipulator standing right there hyping them up?
Even then, the sources are very clear on this mechanism. Just standing in the physical or emotional proximity of the actual abuser triggers a deeply ingrained trauma
It's
response.
like a freeze response.
Exactly. The victim will physically and psychologically freeze up. The primal fear associated with that original abuser is simply too overwhelming. The victim cannot confront the real threat.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I'm picturing this mechanism like a lightning strike.
Oh, I like that.
When lightning comes down, it's looking for the ground, right? Ideally, it wants to strike the tallest, most prominent, most dangerous tree in the field.
And that towering tree is the original abuser.
Yes. But if the resistance is too high, if the fear of confronting that tree is too overwhelming, the electrical charge doesn't just evaporate, it has to discharge.
It has to go somewhere.
So it takes the path of least resistance, it travels sideways and strikes a totally innocent, unassuming sapling nearby. Just a bystander tree that had absolutely nothing to do with the storm in the first place.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the physics of displaced aggression.
It's tragic, really.
It is. The victim's freshly ignited anger takes the path of least resistance. And the source material emphasizes a heartbreaking reality here. This redirection is rarely a conscious, malicious choice by the victim to destroy an innocent person's life.
Right, they're not setting out to be evil.
No, it is a desperate, unconscious psychological escape route. The mind must release the pressure, and it seeks a safe target to do so.
So the lightning hits the wrong tree, and that creates an incredibly devastating chain reaction. You now have an innocent bystander whose life is turned upside down, completely bewildered as to why they have been targeted for destruction.
Yep.
But what about the victim who carried out the act? Do they actually get the catharsis the manipulator promised them? Do they feel better?
They do not. Because the target was misdirected, the psychological release never materializes. Unresolved trauma essentially replicates itself in this scenario.
Replicates itself.
Yeah, the executor, our brainwashed victim, carries out the act on this innocent party. But because the innocent person didn't actually cause the victim's original sediment-level pain, the revenge does not clear the sediment.
Oh, wow.
Instead, it layers a profound sense of dissonance on top of it. A deep, unsettling feeling of wrongness begins to shadow their every wave's moment.
I can imagine. I mean, the conscious mind might cling to the manipulator's script to justify the attack, but the subconscious is fully aware that it struck an innocent sapling. The cognitive dissonance must be deafening.
It absolutely is. The conscious mind works overtime to build rationalizations, but the subconscious truth refuses to be buried. The dissonance becomes a permanent fixture in their psyche.
So, if I am the victim in this scenario, my fingerprints are on the weapon, whether literally or metaphorically.
Right.
I executed the plan. I have to imagine I am looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, while the manipulator who planted the idea is sleeping like a baby. Let's dig into the psychological fallout for both sides of this equation.
The contrast between their realities is stark. For the executor, the sources describe a deeply grim, post-revenge existence. They live in a state of constant, paralyzing terror of discovery.
Like waking up in a cold sweat because a car drove past their house too slowly, jumping every time their phone buzzes.
Yes. The hypersensitivity is relentless. Their nervous system is constantly stuck in fight or flight mode. They misinterpret casual stares from strangers as suspicion.
They just think everyone knows.
Exactly. They react to everyday noises as imminent threats. This grinding, inescapable fear systematically destroys their mental health. They often withdraw completely, becoming isolated from society.
That is so bleak.
The ultimate cost of this borrowed revenge is the total loss of their peace of mind, a price far higher than they ever could have anticipated.
Okay, so while the victim's mind is tearing itself apart, where is the manipulator?
The manipulator has engineered the situation specifically to avoid getting their own hands dirty. They act as a ghost in the machine.
Right, no fingerprints.
By forcing the victim to bear 100% of the physical, legal, and psychological risk, the manipulator builds a massive buffer between themselves and the act.
Wow.
And because of this physical detachment, they arrogantly believe they are perfectly safe. They operate under the delusion that they are completely immune from consequence.
But the truth eventually surfaces, doesn't it? I mean, the victim's paranoia alone seems like a massive liability that would inevitably expose the entire operation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the manipulator's belief in their own immunity is the ultimate vulnerability.
How so?
It reveals the core cowardice of their position. They refuse to assume any personal risk. Over time, their mind becomes so distorted by the power they wield over the victim and by the distance they maintain from the fallout that they completely lose the ability to foresee their own downfall.
So they start believing their own myth. They view themselves as the untouchable puppet master up in the rafters, orchestrating the chaos without ever stepping on stage.
The detachment creates a fatal blind spot. The sources indicate that the threads almost always unravel.
The paranoia gets them.
Yeah, the victim's crushing paranoia leads to erratic behavior and sloppy mistakes, or the innocent target simply refuses to be destroyed and demands justice, forcing an investigation.
The truth comes out.
When the truth finally breaches the surface, the manipulator's dangerous illusion of safety shatters instantly. They are ultimately forced to face the consequences of their orchestration.
Well, that's a relief, at least.
It is. But we must acknowledge that until that moment of exposure, the asymmetry and suffering between the paranoid victim executing the act and the detached manipulator pulling the strings is profoundly cruel.
It is a dark, tragic cascade. Just to recap, a toxic boss or family member causes the initial pain. The victim bottles it up to survive. The manipulator identifies that bottled pain and weaponizes it. The lightning strikes a completely innocent bystander, and the victim is left to live in paranoid terror while the puppeteer briefly enjoys the show.
It's an incredibly elaborate trap.
Which means we need to understand how to dismantle it before we get caught in it. How do you, navigating your daily life, actively protect yourself from becoming a pawn in this cycle?
The source material provides highly actionable solutions for breaking this chain, and the most vital takeaway is that defense starts long before a manipulator ever enters your orbit.
Okay, so what's step one?
We have to meticulously trace the roots of our own anger, sadness, and frustration.
So we have to clean out the sediment ourselves.
Exactly. We cannot allow those emotions to accumulate in the subconscious. The sources emphasize the absolute necessity of practicing emotional expression in safe, healthy ways.
Right.
We must process these feelings before they have the opportunity to warp our judgment.
So when you face that mundane suppression, when the manager belittles you or the family guilt trips you, you do not just swallow it and pretend you are fine.
No, never.
You talk it out with a trusted friend. You write it down. You take it to a therapist. You confront it in the moment so it doesn't become a structural weakness in your wall.
You must act as your own release valve. If you deliberately and safely empty the pressure from your own mind, you leave zero fuel for a manipulator to ignite. The trap only works if you are carrying hidden explosives.
But, I mean, let's be realistic about human nature. We all experience periods of exhaustion. We all have moments of deep vulnerability where we are just tired of holding up the wall and we just want someone to come along and share the load.
Of course.
When we are in that state, how do we defend ourselves?
That requires the second layer of defense. When you find yourself profoundly moved by someone else's words, when someone stepped in and offers you that deeply intoxicating, overwhelming validation of your secret pain, you must force a pause.
Hit the brakes.
You have to actively create a moment of cognitive friction between their comforting words and your subsequent actions. You must step back and ask yourself a very difficult, very honest question. Is this action truly born of my own will?
Like, am I lashing out because it is the right thing to do, or am I just echoing this person's agenda because they made me feel so incredibly seen and protected?
Yes, you have to relentlessly interrogate your own motivations in those moments. If a suggested course of action feels out of alignment with your core character, even if it feels exceptionally good in the short term because it comes wrapped in validation, you must step away from the influence.
So, what does this all mean? I think the ultimate value of this research is that it isn't just a clinical breakdown of extreme psychological abuse. It is an essential guide to daily emotional hygiene.
Oh, absolutely.
Your unexpressed anger and swallowed grief are not just burdens you carry. They are literal back doors into the control room of your mind. Keeping that back door securely locked means actively dealing with your feelings as they occur in reality, rather than waiting until they have mutated in the dark.
Emotional hygiene is precisely what is at stake. We maintain physical hygiene to ward off pathogens, and we must maintain emotional hygiene to defend against psychological infiltration.
Right.
Which brings up a final structural implication worth pondering. We've talked a lot about the relief of validation.
Yeah, being understood.
Exactly. But if feeling completely understood by someone is the exact mechanism manipulators use to bypass our defenses, does that mean our deepest, most human desire for connection is actually our greatest vulnerability?
Wow.
And if so, how do we ever truly know who is holding the keys to our minds?
That is a staggering implication to leave you with. Guard your minds, process your pain, and keep questioning the systems around you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.